I took the back roads to shave 20 minutes off the drive home after a double shift at the plastics plant. My clothes held the smell of hot resin and machine oil. My hands felt stiff from handling molds and stacking crates. It was late enough that the parking lot lights had already shut off, and the sky had that thin, brittle look it gets before frost settles in. I knew those roads well in daylight. I had driven them for years to avoid traffic. At night they changed. The tree lines pressed closer. The ditches looked deeper. The shoulders disappeared into black. The first few miles passed the way they always did. The road narrowed. Pavement gave way to patched asphalt. Reflective markers blinked past in a steady rhythm. I rolled the window down a crack to stay awake. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean. It smelled like damp leaves and cut corn. The radio played through static. I turned it lower and let the engine sound carry me. About 10 miles in, my headlights caught a shape on the right shoulder. A sedan sat half in the ditch, angled nose down, rear tire still on the pavement. Its hazard lights blinked out of sync, one steady, the other weak and delayed. The bumper had a long dent that folded the metal inward. The paint looked dull, like it had been driven through salt for years. I slowed without meaning to. No one sat inside. The front seats were empty. The interior light stayed off. The windshield reflected my beams, showing dust and streaks. I scanned the ground as I passed. Frost coated the grass and gravel. It lay smooth, unbroken, like sugar on a countertop. No footprints led away from the car. None circled it. None came up from the road. I checked the mirrors after I passed. The hazards blinked until the bend swallowed them. I told myself the driver might have walked for help earlier, before the frost set. I told myself a tow would come in the morning. The road stayed quiet. No houses, no driveways, only trees and fields and the narrow strip of asphalt. My shoulders stayed tight. I kept my speed steady and watched the edges. 5 minutes later, I came around a long bend and my headlights caught the same shape again. The same sedan sat on the opposite side of the road, pulled in shallow, facing the wrong direction. The hazard lights blinked with the same uneven rhythm. The same dent creased the bumper. The license plate hung loose on one side. My stomach dropped before I could reason through it. I checked the dash clock. Only minutes had passed. I checked the mirrors and the road behind me. No turnoffs connected those stretches in a way that made sense. The fields between were fenced. The tree line stayed unbroken. I rolled past again, slower this time, scanning harder. The frost still lay smooth around the tires. No tracks crossed the road. The ditch grass showed no crushed path. The hood was cold enough to fog my beams. I felt watched without seeing anyone. My phone lost signal. The bars vanished at once. The radio hissed and then dropped to a dull whisper. I shut it off. The car felt louder without it. Every rattle stood out. Every change in pitch made my chest tighten. I kept both hands on the wheel and my eyes on the road. The road dipped and climbed. Trees closed in and opened again. I started noticing details that had always been there but never mattered. Old reflectors nailed to fence posts. Mailboxes knocked over and never fixed. A culvert mouth dark as a tunnel. The feeling that I was being paced settled in, heavy and slow. I checked the mirrors too often. When my headlights caught the sedan the third time, my breath caught. It sat farther down, just past a small bridge where water ran under the road. This time it rested deeper in the ditch, angled like it had slid. Front bumper pressed into mud. The hazards blinked weak and tired. The same dent glinted. The same plate hung loose. The wrong direction again. I did not stop. I did not slow much. I kept my foot steady and my eyes forward. As I passed, I saw movement near the trunk. Not a shape I could name, just a shift in darkness against darkness. My rear tires crossed the bridge and the sound changed. The sedan fell behind. The road straightened. A mile later, my phone buzzed once, then went dead again. The battery icon flickered. I felt sweat on my neck despite the cold. I kept driving until the trees thinned and the road widened. When the highway sign finally appeared, the relief felt sharp enough to hurt. I merged, increased speed, and put distance between me and the back roads. At home, I parked under the light by the garage. When I got out, I walked around the car out of habit. Fresh mud smeared across my trunk in wide streaks. The prints were not neat. They looked dragged, like palms pressed and slid. The mud was wet and dark. It smelled like creek water and clay. The rest of the car stayed clean. The rear window had a thin arc wiped through the dust, as if something had leaned close. I stood there longer than I should have, breathing the cold and staring at the marks. The explanation settled in piece by piece, slow and ugly. The back roads ran past farms and hunting land. People parked to spotlight deer. People dumped cars. People waited for help. People hid when headlights came. A stranded driver could have tried to flag me down, walked ahead, circled through the trees, and reached the road again. Someone else could have moved the sedan with a tow strap between stretches, trying to get it out, hazards left on to warn traffic. The frost could have fallen after the movement, covering tracks. Mud by the bridge could have coated hands as someone pushed or grabbed the trunk for leverage when the tires spun. The smear on my car could have come from someone reaching out as I passed, slipping, catching metal instead of air. The thought that stayed with me was simpler. Someone had been close enough to touch my car without me stopping. Someone had been on that road with a reason not to be seen. The sedan was a marker, a problem left in the dark, a test of who would stop. I washed the car the next morning. The mud came off in long ribbons. The paint underneath stayed scratched where grit had dragged. I drove the long way to work after that, even when it added time. Months later, I heard about a man arrested for breaking into cars along those roads, using a disabled vehicle to draw people out late at night. He had been caught near a creek, covered in mud, after a driver reported someone running alongside a car on the back roads. The details matched enough to close the loop. I never took that road again. I had been driving for hours, and the road seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. The highway was deserted, the kind of night where everything beyond the headlights disappears into an oppressive black void. My eyes were tired, but I stayed alert. The hum of the tires over the asphalt became a constant background rhythm, the only sound besides the low whine of my engine. The shoulder was lined with snow in uneven banks, a mixture of white and gray from plow residue and sand. The air smelled cold and dry through the vents, carrying a faint trace of asphalt and pine from the roadside. I had done this drive before, alone, but something about the night made every mile feel heavier than the last. I could feel the tension in my shoulders tightening with every curve, every stretch of featureless black ahead. I noticed the semi before I realized I had been searching for one. Its taillights glowed faintly ahead, perfectly aligned, offering a reference point I needed. Darkness always warps perception, stretches distance, and compresses depth. Without headlights ahead to give me visual cues, the road becomes a flat plane, a gray expanse. Following a vehicle is instinctive for me on nights like that. It gives a sense of measure, a way to judge curves and slopes without relying entirely on instinct. I matched my speed to the semi and settled into its rhythm, letting its presence guide me. The engine thrum beneath me was constant and soothing, a signal that I was moving at the right pace. The stretch of highway was long and straight, cutting through open fields with no trees or houses nearby. The only lights were reflectors lining the lane and the distant glow of the horizon far to the left. The semi's trailer reflected none of the light my headlights threw forward. I blinked and adjusted the rearview mirror, noting the low rumble from its tires. It seemed normal. My attention was focused on the two red dots ahead, the taillights that gave the vehicle shape and purpose. It took a moment for me to realize something was wrong. The taillights were still there, bright and steady, but the truck itself had disappeared. No cab, no trailer, nothing except those red dots hovering in the center of my lane. No sound, no reflection, no distortion from the headlights, no dust or exhaust or movement that might hint at a solid object. My pulse picked up. Rational thought ran through my head like a checklist. Fatigue, glare, shadows, mirage. Headlights can flatten shapes. Darkness can swallow objects. The asphalt could have distorted the distance. Maybe I was too tired. I blinked, adjusted my mirrors again. Still nothing. Just those red dots, perfectly aligned, floating in the middle of the road. They moved with a precision that seemed almost deliberate, guiding me forward along the highway as if they had their own awareness. My chest tightened. I fought to maintain calm, telling myself there was a reasonable explanation. The semi had likely taken a hidden exit, a reflection from another source, maybe a tractor trailer on a nearby service road, hidden from sight. But the more I tried to rationalize, the more the dots drew me along, and the more the familiar markers of the road seemed to vanish. The dots veered slightly to the right, guiding me off the highway and onto a frontage road I knew only vaguely. The asphalt was rougher, the lane narrower, and snowbanks pressed close to the edge. My headlights swept over the road, illuminating only the bare trees along the shoulder and the occasional faded sign. There was no guardrail, no lighting, nothing but the rough strip of pavement and the darkness beyond. The red dots moved steadily, keeping a perfect line ahead of me, as if drawing me deeper into the night. I did not accelerate, but I did not hesitate. Following them seemed inevitable, and yet, each second, the tension in my chest increased. The frontage road curved slightly, and I noticed familiar landmarks out of place, or rather stretched differently in the low light. The road ended suddenly at a wide dry canal. Its bed was cut deep into the earth, gravel and stone packed tightly along the bottom, edges falling sharply away from the pavement. The red dots stopped just short of the drop. My heart raced, and I slammed the brakes instinctively, bringing the car to a skid over loose gravel. I sat there, hands gripping the wheel, every nerve alert. I couldn't see beyond the edge of the canal. Nothing moved in the distance, no sign of the semi, no other vehicles, nothing but dark open space. My breathing was steady, controlled, but the unease in my stomach did not abate. I leaned back slightly, trying to take in the scene fully. The red dots did not move. They didn't fade or dim. They hung there in the black, perfectly aligned, waiting. Then I realized they were behind me. I turned my head just slightly, and my stomach dropped into my chest. The red points were there again, now hovering over the beginning of the frontage road where I had entered, perfectly aligned as if they had followed me deliberately. My foot slammed the accelerator instinctively. Gravel spat from under the tires. The engine roared. I floored it without hesitation, the car lurching forward with every ounce of its power. The tires bit into the pavement, throwing up small clouds of dust. The frontage road curved and dumped me back onto the main highway. Headlights swept across the familiar lanes, but the red dots were gone, absorbed into the dark. My chest was tight. My pulse throbbed in my ears. Every instinct told me to keep moving, to get as far as possible. I did not slow until I was many miles down the highway, past the point where the frontage road receded from memory. Later, I checked my dashcam. I needed evidence, something to ground the event in reality. The video played normally at first. The semi was visible, the stretch of highway perfectly familiar. Then the section of road where the semi vanished. Where the red dots had guided me, the footage froze. The timestamp flickered erratically. The file corrupted exactly at that moment. The camera resumed playback only after I had returned to the highway, nothing missing beyond that corrupted frame. Memory cards were fine. No physical damage. No explanation. I studied the footage frame by frame, considering every possibility. Fatigue, glare, hallucination, mirage. All plausible, but none accounted for the precision of the dots, or the way they had reappeared behind me. I mapped the frontage road in daylight. The canal existed. The road dead-ended exactly where I had stopped. There were no alternate exits that could have hidden the truck. The angles of the turns, the smooth line of the floating taillights, and the sudden stop at the canal made sense with no known vehicle. I never drove that stretch alone at night again. I avoid frontage roads. I check dash cams and I check logs. Every piece of the night has a logical explanation in part. Depth perception affected by darkness, optical distortions from headlights, exhaustion sharpening tension, dashcam malfunction at the exact point of confusion. Each factor contributes, but together they create something that feels far stranger than the sum of its parts. The red dots, the floating taillights, the guidance onto a dead-end road, the exact timestamp of corruption. Everything can be explained logically. Yet, every time I think about that night, the sensation of being drawn forward by something invisible, the precision of those points of light, lingers. It is a reminder of how quickly normal perception can fail in darkness, how easily roads can become unfamiliar, and how fragile our sense of certainty is when the night stretches on without end. Even now, I replay the sequence in my mind. I follow the semi. I see the lights disappear. I hit the frontage road. I slam the brakes. I turn. The red points hover behind me. I floor it. I reach the highway. The footage never recovers the missing moment. Every detail has a logical explanation, and yet the memory carries the same weight, the same tension, a quiet insistence that the night can make the ordinary impossible to trust. It is a lesson learned slowly, and one I have not forgotten. I was driving home from my girlfriend's house later than I should have. The visit ran long in the quiet way that feels harmless until you look at the clock and realize the night has thinned out around you. I left with that soft tiredness that makes the world feel manageable, headlights steady, thoughts slow. The air was cool enough to fog the windshield when I first pulled away. I cracked a window and let the smell of cut grass and damp soil clear my head. Dad always said not to take the old cut through. He said it without drama, the way people do when a place has taught them something once and they don't want to learn it again. The cut-through shaved 10 minutes off the drive and avoided the highway patrol that liked to sit near the bend. I had driven it before in daylight. It looked ordinary then. Fields, a narrow bridge, trees that leaned in close. At night it felt different, but everything does at night if you give it the chance. I took it anyway. The road narrowed almost at once. The paint faded to a ghost of a center line. Reflectors stopped. The shoulder dropped into a ditch that caught water and held it. My headlights reached only so far before the dark folded over them. The engine hummed steady. I kept my speed low and my hands loose on the wheel. I passed the bridge and the smell changed. The creek below ran high from recent rain. Wet leaves clung to the banks. The sound of water came up through the floor, a soft rush that faded as I climbed the other side. The trees closed in and the road curved, gentle but constant, like it wanted to keep me from seeing too far ahead. Halfway through, my headlights picked up a man walking backward down the center line, facing me. He stood where the light broke, his outline clean against the dark. He walked with care, heel to toe, arms loose at his sides. His face stayed lifted, eyes fixed on the car. He smiled the whole time. The smile did not flicker. It did not widen or fade as the distance closed. It stayed set, a thin curve that looked practiced, like a habit worn into the face. His clothes were dark and loose, the kind that blend into shadows. His hair hung forward as he moved, brushing his cheeks. I eased off the gas. The car rolled closer. The center line ran straight under his feet. He did not step aside. He did not raise a hand. He kept walking backward, matching my approach step for step, smile steady, eyes bright in the beams. I felt heat rise in my chest, sharp and fast. I checked the shoulder. The ditch fell away, steep and wet. Trees crowded the other side. There was room to pass if I committed to it. I drifted left, then right, testing space. He stayed centered, as if he knew where I would go before I did. I swerved around him at the last second, tires crossing the faded line, suspension dipping as the road crowned. My side mirror brushed air close enough to feel. His face passed the window, close and clear. The smile held. The skin around his mouth looked stretched, pale in the light. His eyes tracked me as I went by. In the mirror, he dropped. He did not stumble. He folded, smooth and quick, hands and feet finding the ground at once. Then he ran on all fours, head low, shoulders rolling, legs driving hard. He sprinted after the car with a speed that did not fit the road or the night. My foot slammed the gas. The engine surged, then sputtered once like it might die. The dash lights flickered. My heart hammered so hard my vision narrowed. The car caught again and pulled, tires biting into the pavement. The mirror showed him gaining for a breath, then falling back as the speed climbed. His movement stayed clean, efficient, like someone trained to move fast when it mattered. The road straightened and dipped. I held the wheel steady and pushed. The engine smoothed out and the car responded. The mirror went empty. Darkness swallowed the stretch behind me. I did not slow. I did not look again until the trees thinned and the first house lights appeared, warm and distant. When I turned onto my street, the familiar shapes steadied me. Mailboxes stood where they always had. The pavement widened. I rolled into the driveway and shut the engine off. The sudden quiet felt heavy. When I opened the door, the smell hit me. Wet dog and copper. It hung in the air around the front of the car, thick and wrong. I walked around with my phone light on, breath shallow. The bumper showed deep dents shaped like fingers. Not scratches, not scrapes. Impressions pressed into the plastic and metal, for close together in places, spaced like a grip. The paint cracked along the edges of some marks. Dark streaks smeared the lower edge, tacky to the touch. I stood there longer than I should have, letting the cold soak in and the smell settle into my clothes. My hands shook. I went inside and locked the door. I washed my hands until the skin felt tight. Sleep did not come. In the morning, daylight stripped the road of some of its weight, but not all of it. I drove back with the sun low and clear. The cut-through looked smaller, narrower, more ordinary. The ditch still held water. The bridge still creaked under tires. The trees still leaned in close. Near the spot where I had passed him, the shoulder showed scuffed earth. Handprints pressed into the damp soil near the center line. Fingers splayed, heel marks deep and sharp. The prints led a short way along the road, then veered into the brush and vanished. I did not linger. I took the car to a body shop and asked for an estimate. The owner walked the bumper, ran a thumb along the dents, and nodded without comment. He said it looked like impact damage from an animal. Large dog, maybe. He said animals hit cars in strange ways when startled, that muscle and momentum can leave marks that look like hands if you want them to. He wrote it up and told me it could be fixed. That explanation fit enough to hold. A person high on something can move in ways that feel wrong. Backward walking can be a trick, a test, a way to keep eyes locked. A smile can be armor. Running on all fours is not unheard of among people who train or who have learned to use their bodies hard and fast. The engine sputter could have been bad gas or a loose sensor, a coincidence time to fear. The smell of wet dog and copper could come from blood and sweat and rain-soaked clothes, from something that had pressed close to the car long enough to leave it behind. A few weeks later, a notice went up at the gas station near the highway. A man had been arrested after a string of incidents on rural roads. He had stepped into traffic, forced drivers to swerve, chased vehicles when they passed. He was found with injuries consistent with being clipped by a car and with blood on his clothes. The report mentioned prior training in parkour and distance running. It mentioned drug use. It mentioned a habit of moving backward to keep faces visible. I stopped taking the cut-through after that. I listened when Dad spoke without drama. The road is still there, still narrow, still quiet. Sometimes I pass the turnoff and feel the urge to save time. Keep going. The extra minutes cost less than the memory of a smile held steady in the headlights, and the sound of breath close enough to hear through glass. I had been on the road long enough that the drive felt like one unbroken stretch instead of a series of turns. The clock on the dash crept past midnight. I was tired, but alert in the careful way that comes from knowing you still have miles left. My eyes stayed open. My hands rested steady on the wheel. I kept the heat low so the warmth would not dull me. Outside, the night was clean and cold, the sky sharp with stars, the shoulders of the road piled high with snow pushed back by plows earlier in the evening. The highway ran through open land. No houses close enough to throw light. No intersections for miles. The only movement came from my headlights sweeping over pavement and reflectors blinking past in pairs. The tires hummed at a steady pitch. Everything felt controlled. I remember thinking that I should stop soon, stretch, get coffee, but I also remember deciding to push on. The road was clear. My head felt focused. That choice sat quietly in the background until later, when it mattered. She appeared without warning. One moment the shoulder held only snow and brush, and the next there was a figure standing just beyond the edge of the lane, arms lifting and dropping fast, uneven, urgent. I eased off the gas and covered the brake, my attention narrowing. She moved into the reach of my headlights as if she had been waiting just outside them. She was barefoot. That detail struck hard and stayed fixed. Her feet pressed directly into the snow, pale skin against packed white, toes darkened and stiff. She wore a thin coat that hung open and something loose beneath it that snapped in the wind from my passing. Her hair fell around her face in tangled strands, blown across her eyes. I slowed more, scanning the road ahead and the mirrors, checking for any other movement. There was no broken vehicle nearby, no hazard lights, no tracks leading away from the shoulder that I could see from my angle. When my headlights fully caught her face, my sense of recognition broke down. The proportions were wrong. Her mouth looked stretched wider than it should have been, pulled thin across her face. Her cheeks seemed hollow, her jaw too long. Her eyes reflected the light sharply, bright points flashing back instead of the softer glow I expected. The expression did not shift as I slowed. It stayed fixed and extreme, as if locked in place. I did not think about anything abstract. I thought about distance, speed, and risk. I thought about how alone the road was. I thought about how close she was stepping toward the lane. I did not stop. I kept rolling forward, holding my line, passing her with only a few feet between us. As I did, she lunged one step closer, her arm reaching out, fingers spread. The light slid off her face and she vanished behind me into the dark. My heart hammered, but my thoughts stayed orderly. I told myself hypothermia distorts behavior. Frostbite and swelling change faces. Headlights erase softness and exaggerate angles. Bare feet meant confusion or fear. None of that meant I should pull over there. I checked the mirror. She was already gone, swallowed by the curve and the night. Less than a minute later, the chime sounded. It was the backseat occupancy alert. A soft, repeating tone meant to remind you that something is detected behind you after you park. I had never heard it while driving. The dashboard flashed a message and cleared. The chime sounded again. A tight pressure spread across my shoulders. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty. No movement, no shape, just dark fabric and headrests. I told myself it was a sensor issue. The cold was severe. Electronics misread pressure when temperatures drop fast. I had slowed abruptly moments earlier. Weight shifts can trigger false readings. The chime sounded again. I reached back with one hand, keeping my eyes forward, and brushed the seat surface. Felt cold and dry. Nothing there. I adjusted my posture to see if my movement would change anything. The tone continued. I kept driving. The next 5 miles stretched thin. The road stayed empty. Snowbanks slid past in a steady blur. The chime came and went, never constant, always unexpected. Sometimes it sounded once, sometimes twice close together. Each time my muscles tightened. I forced myself not to look back again. I focused on the lane, counting reflectors, keeping speed even. I reminded myself that fear builds patterns when the mind is tired. Around the 3rd mile, I noticed a faint smell, damp and cold, like melting snow trapped inside. I checked the vents, thinking outside air had forced its way through. Everything looked normal. The smell faded, then returned. By the 4th mile, my jaw ached from clenching. The chime sounded twice in quick succession and then stopped. It did not return for the rest of the drive. When I reached my neighborhood, the streets were quiet, snow crunching softly under my tires. I pulled into my driveway and shut off the engine. The silence felt heavy after the long stretch of sound. I sat there for a moment, breathing slowly, then stepped out. As I walked around the car, I saw the passenger door. It was not fully closed. It stood open by a few inches, just enough to break the seal. The interior light spilled onto the snow. My stomach dropped. I moved closer and looked inside. Snow covered part of the floor mat, pressed in and melting into dark, wet patches. The edge of the seat was damp. Moisture clung to the door frame. I stood there, breath fogging, listening to the stillness of the street. Nothing moved. No footprints circled the car. No sound carried through the cold air. Inside the house, I locked the door and turned on lights I normally leave off. Sleep came late and thin. Each time I closed my eyes, the image of her face returned, harsh and distorted in my headlights, followed by the sound of the chime. Morning light reduced everything. I went back outside and checked the car carefully. Ice had built up inside the passenger door latch. When I tested it, the mechanism clicked without always catching. With vibration from the road and the temperature change, it could have popped loose without triggering a warning right away. The snow on the floor mat had a clear path. An open door at highway speed pulls air hard. Fine snow would have been driven straight inside, pressed down by turbulence, leaving the exact pattern I saw. I accessed the vehicle logs through the system menu. The backseat sensor recorded pressure fluctuations beginning moments after I slowed near the shoulder and ending as I entered lower speeds close to home. The manual explained that uneven cabin pressure, especially with a compromised door seal in extreme cold, can cause false occupancy alerts. Later that day, I searched local reports. There had been an incident overnight. A woman found several miles from where I passed her, alive but in severe condition. Hypothermia, frostbite, facial swelling. She had wandered from a nearby rural property after a medical episode. Barefoot, disoriented. The description fit closely enough that my chest tightened. Hypothermia dilates pupils. Swelling distorts features. Frostbite darkens skin. Fear stretches expressions into shapes that look wrong under hard light. Headlights flatten depth and leave only contrast. Every detail had a reason. Every piece fit without forcing it. That did not make the memory easier to carry. Understanding what happened did not change how it felt in the moment, or how quickly a series of small, ordinary failures lined up to create something terrifying. I still drive at night. I still trust my instincts. I check my doors before leaving now. I take alerts seriously, but I do not let them pull my mind past what the facts support. On quiet winter nights, when the road is empty and the snowbanks glow in my headlights, I remember how thin the line is between ordinary and unbearable, and how easily the dark turns simple human danger into something that feels much worse. The drive back from the funeral stretched longer than the distance on the map. The highway ran through state forest, a narrow ribbon of asphalt with no lights and no shoulders worth stopping on. I had offered to drive because my brother looked hollow, the way someone looks after holding themselves upright for days and finally letting go. The car smelled like wet wool and cold earth from the cemetery. Our clothes were stiff from standing outside. The heater hummed low. The clock on the dash glowed past midnight. I kept my eyes moving because staying alert felt like the only task left that mattered. The road curved and dipped, and the trees closed in tight enough to swallow the headlights. Snowmelt ran across the pavement in thin black veins. The radio stayed off. My hands ached from gripping the wheel too hard. I could feel my brother's presence beside me without looking, the weight of him pressed into the seat, the way grief makes a person heavier. We had buried our cousin that afternoon. He was my brother's age. The jacket in question had been my brother's favorite for years. A canvas work jacket with a frayed cuff and a tear on the right sleeve from catching it on a nail while helping our uncle fix a shed. He had worn it through winters and thrown it in the trunk that morning because the forecast had promised rain. I had folded it and set it on top of the spare tire so it would not soak through. I remembered the feel of it, the grit in the fabric that never washed out. The road straightened for a short stretch, and that was when the shape appeared at the edge of the beams. At first it looked like a stump or a deer stepping forward, nothing my mind needed to decide about yet. Then it moved with purpose, one leg crossing the yellow line, shoulders squared, coming into full light. The jacket registered before the body did. Same color, dulled by years of use. Same tear on the sleeve, white threads catching the glare. Same length falling to mid-hip. The figure had my brother's height, the way the jacket sat on the shoulders, the angle of the elbows. It stepped into the lane as if it belonged there. My foot lifted from the gas without thought. My chest tightened so hard it felt like a clamp. The world narrowed to the windshield. I heard my brother scream before I made any sound. A raw, broken noise that did not form words. I did not look at him. I kept my eyes on the road and the person standing there. The face never came into focus. The headlights flattened it, washed out detail, turned it into pale planes and shadowed hollows. The figure did not raise its hands. It did not flinch. It stood there, blocking the lane, long enough for my heart to trip over itself. I hit the brakes and the tires chirped on wet pavement. The car nosed down. The seat belt cut into my shoulder. Then the figure stepped back, slow and smooth, not startled, not hurried. It moved off the road into the trees on the right, the jacket turning with it, the tear flashing once more. It did not turn around. The branches swallowed it whole. The road ahead lay empty again, clean and unbroken. I rolled to a stop and sat there shaking, the engine ticking as it cooled in the cold air. My breath came shallow and fast. My brother's scream had ended as abruptly as it began. He made no other sound. The forest pressed in close, leaves and needles wet and heavy, the smell of rot seeping in through the vents. I did not get out. I did not put the car in park. I waited, listening for something that never came. No footsteps, no rustle, no sign of a person moving away. The road stayed empty. The trees held their silence. After a minute that felt much longer, I eased back onto the gas and drove. The speed stayed low. Every curve ahead looked like a threat. I watched the edges of the beams for movement, for another shape stepping forward. Nothing else appeared. The miles passed in a dull, tense crawl. When we reached home, the house sat dark and closed, a familiar shape that felt foreign. I parked in the driveway and shut off the engine. The sudden quiet rang in my ears. My hands trembled as I reached for the trunk release. The metal popped and the lid rose on its struts, the interior light washing the contents in a flat glow. The jacket lay exactly where I had left it, folded, dry. The tear on the sleeve clear and real beneath my fingers. The grit in the fabric scraped my skin when I pressed it. There was no room for doubt about that part. It had been in the trunk all day. We went inside without looking at each other. The house smelled like dust and old wood. I locked the door and checked the windows. I slept in my clothes on top of the bed, lights on, heart still hammering. My brother did not sleep at all. He sat in the living room with the lamp on until morning. In the days that followed, I drove back to that stretch of road in daylight. I parked where the figure had stepped out and walked the shoulder. The ground dropped off sharply into a shallow ditch choked with brush. A narrow game trail cut through the trees, pressed down by hooves and boots. About 10 yards in, I found cigarette butts ground into the mud and a crushed beer can. Further along, a tarp lay folded beneath a log, and a stack of split wood sat nearby. Someone had been camping there, hidden from the road. I talked to a ranger later that week. He told me that hunters sometimes stayed close to the highway for quick access before dawn, that locals cut wood where they should not, that people wore old canvas jackets because they lasted. He mentioned a common tear point on those jackets, the seam that split when the fabric aged. He talked about how headlights distort depth and color at night, how grief sharpens certain details and erases others. I stood there and looked at the road again, the way the trees crowded close, the way the light would have flattened a person's face into nothing. I imagined someone stepping out to flag down help, seeing a car slow, then changing their mind and stepping back into cover when they realized they were blocking the lane. I imagined my own mind grabbing the one image it knew too well and laying it over a stranger's outline. None of that erased what my brother had seen, or the sound he made, or the way my own chest had seized. None of it changed the fact that the jacket in the trunk matched the jacket on the road down to a small, cruel detail. It did not need to be anything beyond human to break us open. A tired brain, a dark road, a familiar shape at the worst possible moment did enough. We do not talk about that night. We did not sleep for days afterward. Even now, years later, we avoid driving that road after dark. The jacket stayed in the trunk for a long time before my brother finally gave it away. When I think back on it, the memory does not blur. It stays sharp and plain, a sequence of events that fit together too well to dismiss and too badly to revisit. The road was real. The person was real. What our minds did with it was real too. That is why the night still follows us. long after the funeral flowers dried and the seasons turned. We took a wrong exit after a concert that ran later than planned. The parking lot had emptied in waves, and we left with the last cluster of cars, ears still ringing, throats dry, heads buzzing in that thin way that comes from noise and lights and standing too long. I drove because I was the least tired, or at least I said I was. The others slumped into their seats and let the night cool their faces through cracked windows. The highway signs blurred past faster than my thoughts could settle. The missed exit happened in a moment that felt small. A ramp peeled off to the right, half hidden by a truck, and by the time I saw it, the lane had already narrowed. I stayed straight, told myself there would be another chance. The GPS recalculated without comment and sent us onto a smaller road that cut away from the highway lights. The pavement changed texture. The sound under the tires went from smooth hiss to a coarse hum. The darkness thickened. The rear out turned us onto a farm road that didn't feel public. The center line vanished. Reflectors stopped. There were no signs, no mile markers, no mailboxes. The shoulders dropped into shallow ditches filled with black water that caught the headlights and gave nothing back. Trees leaned in from both sides, then fell away to open fields that looked flat and endless. The smell through the vents changed to damp soil and manure. We joked about it at first. The jokes were easy, the kind that fill space when nobody wants to admit unease. I kept my speed down and followed the GPS line, which looked too thin for comfort. The road bent and dipped. Gravel popped against the undercarriage in places where the asphalt broke apart. I scanned for a turnaround and saw none. The first time we passed the burned-out barn, it registered as a landmark and nothing more. It stood back from the road on the right, a dark frame against darker trees. The roof had collapsed inward. The siding hung in strips. The smell of charred wood lingered even with the windows up. I noted it and drove on. A mile later, the road curved hard left and then right, and the barn appeared again on the left side, closer this time. The angle made the damage clearer. Blackened beams jutted like ribs. A field spread behind it, cut low, soil exposed in long rows. The headlights washed over the place and moved on. Someone in the back shifted. The joking slowed. The third time we saw the barn, it stood dead ahead, centered in the road as if the lane aimed straight at it before bending away at the last moment. This time a man stood in front of it, close enough that the headlights caught his outline cleanly. He waved slowly, one arm lifting and falling with no hurry. He did not step aside as the light reached him. He did not shield his eyes. I eased off the gas and rolled forward. The man stayed put. He wore a jacket that looked heavy and old, the color washed out by glare. His stance was square, feet planted, shoulders relaxed. He did not hurry. The waving continued, steady and calm, like he expected us to stop. I did not stop. I edged the wheel left, giving him room, and passed with a wide berth. As we went by, his face stayed in shadow, the brim of a cap cutting his features off at the eyes. The waving arm lowered. He turned his head to follow the car as we went past. I watched him in the mirror until the barn swallowed him. The road beyond tightened and rose slightly. The GPS line jittered and then froze. The screen locked with the arrow pointing straight ahead. The time in the corner reading 12:03 a.m. I glanced at the dash clock out of habit. It also read 12:03 a.m. The second hand did not move. I tapped the screen. Nothing changed. The radio display dimmed and brightened but stayed on the same minute. I told myself clocks glitch. Software hangs. Cars run on networks that hiccup when signals drop. We were far enough out that service had gone thin. The idea felt solid enough to hold. The road narrowed further. The surface changed to packed dirt without warning. Dust rose in a pale cloud that caught the headlights and turned the air milky. I slowed more. The fields on either side looked freshly worked. Dark clods lay piled in ridges. The ditches filled with mud that shone wet. The sense of repetition deepened. The curves began to feel familiar before we reached them. The same line of trees leaned at the same angle. The same fence posts appeared with the same spacing. My shoulders crept up toward my ears. I checked the mirrors too often. The barn did not appear again. but the idea of it hovered close, like a word on the tip of the tongue. The clock stayed frozen. The GPS stayed stuck. The headlights carved the same shapes out of the dark over and over. The silence in the car thickened. No one filled it. The only sounds were the engine, the tires, the soft clack of gravel. At some point, the dirt road dipped into a low stretch where water had collected. The tires rolled through with a muted splash. The steering tugged and then settled. The smell of wet earth grew stronger. I kept my line and my speed steady. I did not turn around. Turning around felt like admitting we were lost in a way that would make it worse. The man came back to me then, not as a threat but as a problem left unsolved. A local could wave down drivers to warn them off private land, or to ask for help, or to slow traffic near livestock. Standing in the road was reckless, but people do reckless things on quiet nights. The barn could be a landmark he used to orient strangers. The repetition could be loops created by poorly marked service roads between fields. The clocks could be frozen because the system had crashed when it lost signal. The road rose again and leveled out. The surface hardened back to pavement. Reflectors appeared, dull and far apart, then brighter. A stop sign loomed out of the dark. I rolled to it and stopped, heart thudding, hand steady. Cross traffic did not exist. I turned right and followed the lane as it widened. Within a mile we hit proper pavement, smooth and black, with a center line and signs that made sense. Streetlights appeared, spaced wide but real. The GPS screen flickered and refreshed. The arrow jumped forward on the map. The time snapped ahead to 12:59 a.m. The dash clock did the same, second hand spinning once before settling. Relief washed through the car in a wave that left me tired all at once. The missing stretch sat behind us, compressed into nothing by the jump in time. I drove on without looking back. We reached a gas station near the highway and pulled in under bright lights. The place smelled like hot coffee and oil. I shut the engine off and sat for a moment, letting the quiet settle. When I got out, the tires crackled on concrete, shedding grit. I walked around the car out of habit. Mud packed the wheel wells thick and tight, pressed up into the curves where tire met body. It was not splashed or streaked. It looked pushed in, smoothed by hands or tools into the gaps. The same dark soil clung to the undercarriage, wedged into corners that normal driving did not reach. I crouched and touched it. It was cold and wet. The explanation formed slowly and stayed once it settled. We had been routed through working land, through service roads that looped between fields and barns with no public markers. The repetition came from circular access routes designed for equipment. The burned-out barn sat at a junction that fed multiple loops, making it appear from different angles like the same place repeating. The man was a farmer or a hand, flagging traffic away from a section that had turned to mud after irrigation or runoff. Standing still and waving slowly made sense when engines spook animals and machines alike. The clock's freezing fit too. Modern cars sync time through networks and satellites. Lose signal long enough and systems hang. The jump forward happened when the connection reestablished and corrected. The missing hour was not missing at all. It was a stretch of slow driving on dirt, loops that covered little distance while eating time, compressed by fatigue and stress into a blur that felt like absence. The mud in the wheel wells came from the low stretch we crossed, where tires threw wet soil upward, packed clay sticks and molds under pressure. Driving slow through deep ruts can force it into places it does not usually go. It looked deliberate because the wheel rotation pressed it there evenly. We did not talk about it. Not then, not later. The facts were enough. We cleaned the car the next day and the mud came off in heavy slabs. The GPS history showed a mess of short lines over a small area, loops that overlapped and crossed, exactly what service roads look like from above. I still think about the man sometimes, the way he waved without urgency, the way he did not move until we passed. I think about how easily a public road can become private without signs, how quickly systems fail when they lose the sky, how repetition can feel like a trap when it is only poor planning and late hours. I think about the weight of mud packed into places it should not be, and how it takes pressure to put it there. We took the highway home after that, even when it cost more. The extra money felt small compared to the sense of sliding sideways through a place that did not want us there. Dispatch sent me out just after midnight for a stalled vehicle up a service road that cut through state land. The note said no hazards and no caller answering. That happens more than people think. Phones die. People wander off looking for signal. Cars get left when a ride shows up. I had worked that zone for years and knew the road. It ran past a cluster of seasonal cabins before climbing into thicker timber. In winter, it stayed quiet. In fall, it smelled like wet leaves and would smoke. I drove the wrecker slow, letting the headlights sweep the trees. The night was damp but not raining. Fog hung low in the hollows and thinned on the ridges. The road surface changed from patched asphalt to gravel without warning, the tires crunching louder as the cab filled with the smell of dust and pine sap. My radio stayed silent except for the usual hiss. The dash clock glowed steady. The truck felt solid, the way a familiar tool does when you trust it. I found the car a mile past the last cabin. It sat angled toward the ditch, driver door open, interior light dead. No hazards blinked. No steam rose. I cut the engine and stepped out. The quiet pressed in right away, thick enough to hear my own breath. The cold had that wet bite that creeps through gloves. I scanned the trees and the road. Nothing moved. The car looked ordinary. A compact sedan with road grime on the panels and a cracked taillight taped over. The hood was cold when I touched it. The keys were gone. The seat held a jacket tossed aside, pockets turned out. The floor mat on the driver's side was muddy, boot prints smeared and layered. The prints led out of the door and toward the trees, then disappeared into leaf litter. No fresh tracks showed on the road itself. The gravel lay smooth, like it had settled hours earlier. I did a quick walk around and hooked it up. The winch whined low as the cable took weight. The flatbed tilted and leveled. The metal clanged in familiar ways, echoes bouncing off trunks and rock. I kept my back to the cab while I worked, not from fear but habit. You stay aware out there. People hide. Animals wander. Tires roll when they should not. As I tightened the last chain, something knocked on the back of my cab. 3 slow taps. They came from the panel behind the driver's seat, solid and spaced, like someone rapping knuckles against steel to be heard over an engine. I froze with the ratchet half-turned, listening. The forest did not answer. No footsteps approached. No branch scraped. The taps did not repeat. I walked around the cab with my light on, scanning the ground and the brush. No one stood there. No shape pulled back. The side steps were clean. The paint showed no new marks. I told myself a branch had fallen or a rock had slid from the bed when the angle changed. Metal pops and shifts when you least expect it. I climbed in and pulled forward, easing the load onto the bed. The road back was narrow and rough. I kept my speed down. The mirrors showed the sedan riding quiet, chains snug. The forest opened in short windows and closed again. A mile in, I checked the mirror and felt my stomach drop. Muddy footprints marked the flatbed behind the towed car. They were fresh and dark, clear enough to show tread. They started near the rear edge and moved forward, one after another, toward the sedan. The spacing was normal. The direction was clear. As I watched, another print appeared, wet and sharp, forming as if pressed down by weight. I eased off the gas and kept the wheel straight. My eyes flicked between the mirror and the road. The prints continued to form, slow and deliberate, climbing toward the car. I could see the bed's grit compress under each step. No body showed above the rails. Nothing moved in the air behind me. I pulled over into a wide turnout near a stand of birch and shut the engine down. The silence hit hard. I stepped out and circled the truck with my light high. The footprints lay there in a clean line, ending just behind the sedan's rear bumper. No prints crossed the sides. None led off the bed. The car itself showed smears of mud along the trunk edge, as if someone had leaned close. I climbed onto the bed, heart steady but loud in my ears. The metal was slick with moisture. I followed the prints to their end. They stopped as clean as they had begun. The mud looked fresh, the edges soft. I checked under the car, around the rails, inside the wheel wells. Nothing hid there. No one dropped to the ground. No tracks showed below. I stood on the bed longer than I should have, breathing fog and diesel and pine. The explanation came to me in pieces. People hitch rides on wreckers sometimes. Drunks climb onto beds and pass out. Trespassers hide when lights swing. A person could have crouched low behind the sedan, moving forward where the mirrors could not catch them. When I stopped, they could have jumped off into the trees, leaving no clear trail on leaf litter. That fit until I looked again. The prints were clean and centered. No scuffs showed where someone climbed on. The rails were damp but unmarked. The sides showed no handprints. I finished the trip without stopping again. The highway lights felt too bright when I reached them. At the yard, I dropped the sedan and washed the bed down. The mud slid off in heavy sheets, streaking brown across the concrete. I scrubbed until the steel showed bare. I filed the report and called dispatch. They said no one else was logged on that stretch. No hikers, no forestry crews, no deputies. The cabins were empty this time of year. The sedan owner never answered follow-up calls. The file closed itself after a week. I tried to put it behind me. Work does that if you let it. Weeks passed. The nights blurred together. Then another call came from the same road. Another stalled vehicle near the cabins. Same notes. No hazards. No answer. I drove out again, telling myself patterns only feel real when you want them to. The cabin lights were dark. Smoke did not rise from any chimney. The car sat near the same turnout as before, door open, engine cold. Mud marked the floor mat. The prints led toward the cabins this time, not the trees. I followed them with my light until they reached the porch of the nearest cabin. The door stood shut. The windows were dark. I did not knock. I backed away and hooked the car without turning my back. When I felt the load settle, the cab shook once, like a weight shifting behind me. I did not look until I reached the highway. The bed showed prints again, fewer this time, clustered near the cab wall. They ended there, toes pointing toward the steel. I drove straight to the yard and cleaned the truck until dawn. I started paying attention after that. I noted every call from that stretch. I watched the bed in the mirror more often than the road. I parked under lights. I kept the doors locked. Nothing else happened for months. The memory faded enough to let me breathe. Then I took a day off and went up to the cabins with a friend. In daylight, we walked the road and the turnouts. We found a footpath cut through the brush that led from the ditch to a hidden lean-to behind the largest cabin. Inside were old boots caked with mud, a tarp, and a coffee can full of cigarette butts. The ground showed tracks going back and forth to the road. Someone had been living there off and on, watching the traffic, waiting for help to arrive. The prints on the bed made sense then. A person hiding behind a car could climb on while the bed tilted, moving forward low where mirrors missed them. They could crouch near the cab wall, tapping to test if the driver would react. When the truck slowed, they could drop off into darkness. Mud would show the path even if the person never did. I reported the lean-to. It was cleared out a week later. The calls from that road stopped. I still sold the truck 6 months later. Not because of fear exactly. Trust breaks quietly. Once it does, every sound means more than it should. I bought another rig and kept working. I still run nights. I still answer calls where phones do not. I just slow down near the cabins and keep the lights high, and I never ignore 3 slow taps on steel. I was driving overnight to save money, hauling camera gear after a freelance shoot that had fallen apart in the last hour. The client canceled once the weather turned, and I packed everything back into the rental with a knot in my stomach. I did the math in my head and decided against a motel. I had slept in cars before. I told myself I felt fine. Too fine, really, the kind of alert that comes from stress instead of rest. The highway thinned as it climbed. Traffic dropped away until I felt like the only moving thing left. The gas gauge sat just above half. The dashboard lights glowed a dull orange. My eyes stayed open without effort. I passed the motel turnoff and didn't slow. The sign flicked by and vanished in the mirror. I told myself I would pull over later if I needed to. The road began to rise into switchbacks. No moon showed through the cloud cover. Pines crowded the shoulders, their tops swaying against a darker sky. Rock walls pressed close in places, cut rough and vertical. My headlights carved short tunnels through the bends. Every turn felt tighter than the last. I dropped my speed and focused on the painted lines. The air changed as I climbed. It smelled colder, sharper. The temperature gauge dipped. The radio had lost any station hours earlier, so I drove in silence. The only sound was the engine and the low hiss of tires on pavement. My hands felt steady on the wheel. My thoughts stayed clear. That made me uneasy. I had learned to distrust that false clarity. Halfway up a long curve, something crossed the road ahead of me. It moved from left to right in 3 steps. Tall, upright, narrow through the shoulders. Not a deer. The legs were too straight, the torso too vertical. It did not bound or crouch. It walked. I slammed the brakes without thinking. The tires chirped. The car nosed down. My heart kicked hard enough to hurt. The road ahead lay empty. No shape, no movement. The pines stood still. The rock face reflected my beams back at me. I sat there with my foot on the brake, breath loud in my ears. I scanned the shoulder, then the ditch, then the trees beyond. Nothing moved. No eyes caught the light. No sound came from the brush. I eased forward and rolled past the spot where I had seen it. The road surface looked clean. No tracks, no scuff marks. The mind fills gaps when tired, I told myself. Shadows stretch. Depth gets strange in headlight glare. I drove on. The switchbacks tightened. The drop on the outside grew steeper. Guardrails appeared in short runs, dented and scraped, then vanished again. I checked the mirrors more often than before. That was when I noticed the headlights behind me. They sat low and steady in the rearview mirror. 2 white points, faint but clear. They did not swing wide on the turns the way mine did. They did not brighten or dim. They stayed the same distance back, bend after bend. I listened for an engine and heard nothing beyond my own. I sped up a little. The lights stayed put. I slowed. They stayed put. I took a sharper line through a curve and glanced back. The lights held steady, like they were pinned to the mirror. The thought that came to me was simple and unwelcome. Someone could drive those roads without headlights on, using another car's beams to see. I checked my speed again. My pulse thudded in my throat. I pulled off at a narrow turnout carved into the rock. Gravel crunched under my tires. I rolled to a stop and waited, foot hovering over the accelerator. The lights behind me did not pass. They did not draw closer. They vanished the moment I stopped. The mirror showed only dark road and trees. I waited longer than felt smart. Nothing came around the bend. No engine noise rose or fell. The silence felt thick. I eased back onto the road and continued the climb. The lights returned within a minute. Same distance, same height, same lack of sound. I tried to convince myself it was a reflection, some trick of angle and glass. I adjusted the mirror. They stayed centered. I flipped it to night mode. They stayed there. I thought about the shape in the road again. Tall, upright. A person could walk across a road that way. A hiker moving between campsites. A hunter cutting across. Someone crossing from one shoulder to the other, misjudging speed and distance. Fear sharpens memory. It smooths out edges that were never clear. The climb stretched on. The air grew colder. Frost glinted along the guardrail. I kept my lane and my speed. I did not stop again. Near the top, the road leveled and straightened for a short run. I checked the mirror and saw the lights at last begin to fall back. They dimmed, then winked out as if the other vehicle had turned off or dropped into a turnout. Relief came in a wave that left me shaky. The last miles passed without incident. Dawn thinned the dark. The sky lightened from black to deep blue. Pines took shape instead of shadow. I descended the far side and found a gas station open at the edge of a small town. I pulled in, parked under the lights, and shut the engine off. In the clear morning light, I walked around the car to stretch. Along the passenger side panel, near the rear door, long scratches ran through the paint. They curved slightly parallel, spaced like fingers. The metal beneath showed dull gray. Some marks had a hooked end, as if something had slipped and caught again. I stood there and breathed, letting the cold wake me fully. The explanation settled slowly, each piece fitting without drama. Mountain roads draw wildlife at night. Elk and bears roam those slopes. A startled animal could rear up when caught in headlights, then bolt. Claws rake when bodies brush metal. The scratches sat at the right height for a large animal's forelimbs. The rental company would call it animal damage because that was the category they used. The headlights made sense too. A vehicle running without lights could follow another to save battery or hide presence. On winding climbs, distance stays constant. Sound gets swallowed by rock and trees. When I pulled off, the other driver likely did the same, waiting until I moved on. There was no reason to pass. There was no reason to be seen. As for the figure in the road, daylight changed it. A tired mind sees posture where there is none. A bear crossing on a slope can look upright for a step or two. Perspective flattens and lies. Fear does the rest. I fueled up, bought coffee, and drove on once the sun cleared the ridge. When I returned the rental, the clerk walked the car, noted the damage, and marked animal involvement. The charge went on my card. I didn't argue. I had saved the motel money and paid for it another way.